I had a pet lizard named George. He was cool, but he made me really bored. So I gave him to my mom, and she loves him very much because animals are better than...
Before she ever set foot on the American Idol stage, Sophie Powers was already making waves far from the spotlight of network television. Born and raised in Toronto, Canada, this unapologetically bold artist was no stranger to the mic or the online world. Long before the judges ever heard her voice, Sophie had been carving out a name for herself in the digital underground, fusing pop-punk energy with raw Gen Z attitude. Her tracks like Clearview and Greed weren't chart toppers in the traditional sense, but they resonated deeply with a niche audience tired of the polished, predictable music scene. Sophie wasn't just a vocalist, she was a designer, a lyricist, a visual architect of her own brand. At just 20 years old, she had already positioned herself as a multifaceted creator who refused to play by anyone else's rules. But what American Idol viewers didn't see was the reality that Sophie wasn't walking into that audition room looking for permission or a platform. She had already been building both on her own terms. While most Idol contestants show up hoping for validation or a foot in the industry door, Sophie walked in with something very different in mind: disruption. And the way she carried herself made that clear from the first second. This wasn't a girl chasing fame. This was an artist stepping into a room that was about to get flipped upside down. When Sophie Powers finally stepped into the spotlight on American Idol in 2025, she didn't walk, she arrived, with a kind of confidence that made it immediately clear this wasn't just another hopeful chasing a dream. Dressed in an outfit that collided grunge, streetwear, and high fashion into something uniquely her own, she looked more like a headliner at a punk festival than a contestant on a primetime talent show. But what truly set the tone wasn't her look, it was her attitude. Before singing a single note, Sophie made it clear she wasn't here to impress. She introduced her original song with a smirk, describing it as a tearjerker, luring the judges into expecting vulnerability, perhaps a heartbreak ballad or an emotional acoustic number. What followed, however, was the exact opposite. The song, titled STFU, was a blast of pop-punk chaos, sarcasm, and defiance, packed with biting lyrics that took aim at overtalkers, advice givers, and anyone who refused to listen. The room, accustomed to emotionally charged performances and soaring vocals, suddenly found itself grappling with a sarcastic Gen Z anthem delivered at full volume. It wasn't just a song, it was a statement, an ambush, a deliberate bait and switch that challenged the very foundation of what the Idol stage represents. And as the opening verse rolled in, one thing became painfully obvious to everyone in the room. Sophie Powers wasn't just here to audition. She was here to make a point, and no one was ready for it. The moment Sophie Powers launched into her performance, the energy in the room shifted, and the judges were visibly caught off guard. It wasn't the kind of reaction you typically see during auditions. Lionel Richie, always the diplomatic veteran, appeared frozen, trying to process what he was witnessing. Luke Bryan, usually quick to crack a joke or offer encouragement, looked like he couldn't decide whether to laugh or look away. Carrie Underwood, sitting in as a guest judge, glanced from side to side, her expression teetering between amusement and disbelief. Sophie wasn't just performing, she was detonating expectations. Her lyrics, especially the blunt chorus, "Shut the F*** up, I'm not asking for opinions," did more than surprise the judges. They challenged them. The show's very foundation is built on critique, feedback, and shaping talent through commentary. And here was a contestant who walked in and, quite literally, told the system to stay quiet. What followed was a strange silence. Not the awe-filled pause that comes after a flawless vocal run, but a breath-holding kind of confusion. No one on that panel had seen this coming, and it showed. Lionel searched for something respectful to say. Luke squirmed. Carrie's reaction sparked online speculation almost immediately. Was she offended or impressed by the audacity? This was American Idol's polished, family-friendly stage being cracked open by a raw, unfiltered voice that didn't care about approval. And in that moment, the judges weren't judging. They were reacting. Human, uncertain, and clearly out of their element. What most viewers didn't realize during Sophie Powers' chaotic audition was that none of it was spontaneous. STFU wasn't a last-minute stunt or a rebellious impulse. This was a fully formed artistic statement. Sophie had written, produced, and released the track on her own long before auditioning. The song was already gaining traction in alt-pop and punk circles online, with fans praising its unapologetic tone and razor-sharp wit. So when Sophie stood on the Idol stage and delivered that explosive performance, she wasn't pleading for a chance. She was showcasing who she already was. This wasn't an emotional cry for validation. It was a calculated disruption of what American Idol has long represented, a safe, polished, and often formulaic launchpad for sanitized talent. Sophie challenged that system from within. Her performance was structured to make viewers and judges uncomfortable, but intentionally so. It held a mirror up to the industry's sanitized expectations and asked, "Is there room for someone who doesn't play by your rules?" The fact that she chose not to conform wasn't the result of inexperience or arrogance. It was a deliberate message. I know exactly who I am, and I'm not shrinking to fit your mold. Where most contestants dial themselves down to appeal to everyone, Sophie turned everything up. Her look, her voice, her lyrics, and most of all, her refusal to apologize. That's what made the moment iconic. It wasn't just bold, it was strategic. And it exposed just how little room the show has for artists who refuse to play safe. When it came time for the judges to vote, the energy in the room turned cold. You could feel the tension, not because Sophie Powers had failed to deliver, but because she had delivered something the show wasn't built to handle. Lionel Richie, ever the smooth talker, struggled to strike a balance between respect and restraint. He complimented her uniqueness, but avoided endorsing it. Luke Bryan, clearly rattled, echoed the sentiment, calling her memorable, but stopping short of support. Carrie Underwood, perhaps the most conflicted of the three, praised Sophie's individuality, but questioned if her song was right for the Idol stage. It was a polite dismissal wrapped in hollow compliments. But viewers watching closely could see the subtext. Sophie wasn't being turned away because she lacked talent. She was being turned away because she didn't conform. The real message from the judges wasn't, "You're not good enough." It was, "You don't fit our brand." That quiet rejection spoke volumes. Sophie had dared to use the Idol platform to say something uncomfortable, and the response was to shut the door. What American Idol didn't tell you is how narrow its definition of artistry can be. The show has always celebrated risk, so long as it's safe, scripted, and emotionally digestible. But Sophie's risk was raw, real, and completely unpredictable. And for that, they sent her home. Not because she wasn't ready for Idol, but because Idol wasn't ready for her. What unfolded on American Idol stage was only half the story. The real explosion happened off camera, in the hours and days after Sophie Powers' audition aired. Social media platforms lit up like a wildfire. On Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and Instagram, Sophie's name surged to the top of trending charts. But it wasn't just admiration or outrage. It was chaos, the kind that only truly viral moments create. Clips of her performance were edited into reaction videos, memes, and commentary breakdowns. Some viewers hailed her as a punk pop icon who disrupted a stale TV formula. Others saw her as disrespectful, declaring she had ruined the sacred image of Idol with profanity and sarcasm. But one thing was undeniable. Sophie Powers had become the most talked about contestant of the season, without even advancing to the next round. And yet, American Idol barely acknowledged the ripple effect. What they didn't show you were the thousands of divided comments, the debates across message boards, and the cultural conversation her performance sparked. Mainstream entertainment outlets published think pieces on whether her act was brilliance or blasphemy. Music blogs, however, were quick to defend her, praising her delivery as satirical genius, and her song as a brutal, timely middle finger to curated perfection. Even critics who disliked the lyrics admitted one thing: Sophie had stolen the spotlight. American Idol's producers edited the moment for brevity, inserting some puzzled judge reactions and brief audience cuts. But what they couldn't fit into that broadcast was the cultural flashpoint Sophie became overnight. The broadcast ended, but the conversation had just begun. And in that conversation, Sophie Powers wasn't a rejected contestant. She was the headline. Among a flurry of reactions to Sophie Powers' unforgettable audition, one detail ignited even more curiosity than her song or the judges' confusion: a plain white bandage across the bridge of her nose. It wasn't mentioned by the judges, nor explained in the episode. But for millions watching at home, that single strip of medical tape became a magnet for speculation. Was it a fashion statement? An injury? A rebellious accessory to match her punk persona? Theories exploded across the internet. Some joked she was wearing armor before telling the judges to shut the F up. Others guessed she was making a silent protest. But what American Idol didn't tell you, because it never came up on camera, was the truth behind it. Shortly after her episode aired, Sophie addressed the mystery head-on via her Instagram stories and interviews. Calmly and humorously, she revealed the bandage was covering a minor cosmetic procedure done just days before the audition. No drama, no scandal, just reality. And instead of hiding it or postponing her appearance, she wore it. Not with shame, but with audacity. That decision, intentional or not, became a powerful metaphor. In a world obsessed with filters, glam squads, and the illusion of flawlessness, Sophie walked into one of America's most watched shows and said nothing about the very thing everyone was staring at. She let it speak for itself. And in doing so, she turned a simple post-op bandage into a cultural statement. It was punk in its purest form. Not loud guitars or broken glass, but raw honesty. A refusal to cover up what's inconvenient. A rejection of the idea that everything must be camera-ready. While other contestants rehearsed smiles and sanitized stories, Sophie stood on stage, unfiltered and bandaged, saying more with her silence than most do with a whole sob story. That's why fans didn't just remember the song or the lyrics. They remembered the bandage. It wasn't weakness. It was armor. And it became an unexpected symbol for everything Sophie represented. Imperfection worn like a badge of defiance. Most contestants walk onto the American Idol stage hoping it will change their lives. Sophie Powers walked in knowing exactly how to change the show instead. And when she was cut from the competition, she didn't retreat, she advanced. Because what American Idol didn't show was what happened next. In the days following her audition, Sophie's name exploded across streaming platforms. STFU, the very song that got her rejected, surged in listens, trending on Spotify and being featured in viral TikTok sounds. The track she had already released independently before Idol was now finding a massive global audience. But this wasn't luck. It was strategy. Sophie didn't just audition. She launched a calculated campaign. By treating the Idol stage not as a final destination, but as a springboard, she flipped the usual narrative on its head. Rejection didn't slow her down. It poured gasoline on her momentum. With each new headline, each think piece, each heated social media thread, her visibility skyrocketed. Industry insiders began to take notice. Producers, alt labels, and managers within the underground punk pop scene started reaching out. Sophie didn't wait to be chosen. She turned her 3-minute performance into a full-blown marketing masterclass. Instead of softening her image or editing her message to be more TV-friendly, she doubled down on her identity. She released new music that carried the same unapologetic tone, visuals that were raw and rebellious, and interviews where she owned every piece of the controversy with humor and clarity. Sophie made it clear she didn't lose. She rebranded, and she did it faster than most Idol winners could dream of. In an industry where artists are often shaped by committees and cleaned up for mass appeal, Sophie proved she didn't need a makeover, just a microphone and a moment. And she took both without ever asking for permission. What started as a viral moment quickly evolved into something much bigger, a movement. Sophie Powers didn't just walk away from American Idol with a spike in streams. She walked out with an army. On social media, fans began dubbing themselves the STFU Army, a tongue-in-cheek rebellion that perfectly captured Sophie's energy. They weren't just streaming her music, they were showing up at her shows, tagging her in fan art, and even wearing nose bandages in solidarity. What American Idol didn't see coming was how quickly Sophie's unapologetic message would take root in Gen Z culture. This was no passive fandom. These were digital soldiers, fueled by irony, empowerment, and the thrilling sense that they were backing someone who had outsmarted the system. Across TikTok, reaction videos and stitched edits turned Sophie's performance into a meme engine. On Reddit, users dissected her lyrics and defended her right to challenge the show's outdated format. And on Instagram, fans turned her audition into visual protest art. But this wasn't just noise. The traction was real. Indie festivals and underground shows started booking her. Online music outlets began covering her moves. Her identity as an alt-pop disruptor solidified, not through industry endorsement, but through grassroots momentum. And unlike other artists who build a brand and hope to attract a crowd, Sophie did the reverse. She became the brand, the bandage, the attitude, the refusal to apologize. And the STFU army followed not because she asked them to, but because she stood for something real. They didn't see her as a failed contestant. They saw her as a voice they had been waiting for. The kind that doesn't just sing into the mic, but screams into the void and dares the world to scream back. In just a few weeks, Sophie Powers had gone from niche artist to cultural symbol. And she did it with a song no one thought would survive primetime. American Idol framed Sophie Powers as a bold, eccentric footnote, an audition gone viral, a moment that sparked conversation, but ultimately faded into rejection. But that was the story they could show. The real story. The one that unfolded far from the edited cameras and polished judge reactions was much more revealing. What American Idol couldn't show was the system being challenged in real time. For over 2 decades, the show has rewarded a very specific formula: emotional vulnerability, safe storytelling, polished image, and vocals that match a mold. But Sophie shattered that mold in 3 minutes flat. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't hide her flaws. She arrived with satire, defiance, and raw self-awareness, and exposed the limits of a platform that still claims to celebrate individuality. Her performance wasn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a cultural confrontation, a creative mirror held up to the industry that asked, if you want authenticity, can you handle it when it's not pretty? The answer clearly was no. But the irony is, in denying her, American Idol may have just validated her more than any golden ticket could. Because Sophie didn't just audition. She documented the failure of a system to adapt to a new generation's voice. She weaponized that failure, turned it into music, memes, and movement, and walked out of the studio not as a contestant, but as a case study. For every viewer who felt like they didn't belong, every artist who's been told to tone it down,